The world is bigger and stranger than most people will ever know. There are places on this planet so hidden, so bizarre, and so hard to believe that even the people living closest to them have never seen them. Some were discovered by accident. Some stayed secret for centuries. These are the 20 hidden places even locals can't believe exist. Tunnel of Love, Klevin, Ukraine. In the Rivne region of western Ukraine, there's a stretch of railway track that looks like it belongs in a fairy tale. Trees on both sides have grown together overhead, forming a perfect green arch that runs for nearly 3 miles. What most visitors don't know is that this place was never meant to be seen. During the Cold War, Soviet military planners had trees planted alongside the tracks specifically to hide the movement of military equipment through the forest. After the Soviet Union collapsed, the military use ended, but the trees kept growing. A freight train still runs through 3 times a day, hauling plywood to a nearby factory, and the movement of the train is actually what keeps the arch trimmed into its perfect shape. Without the train, the tunnel would collapse into ordinary forest. It was virtually unknown outside Ukraine until photos appeared online in 2011, and even local residents in Klevin had walked past the entrance for years without stepping inside. Today, it draws visitors from around the world, but the surrounding town remains tiny and largely unchanged. There are no ticket booths, no fences, and no signs marking it as anything special. The only warning is the train itself, which gives little notice before it comes through. Locals call it the Tunnel of Love, and according to an old legend, couples who walk its length with a sincere wish will have that wish come true. Zhujiagu Valley, Sichuan, China. Tucked into the Min Mountains near the edge of the Tibetan Plateau, Zhujiagu Valley covers over 72,000 hectares of forest, lakes, and waterfalls in northern Sichuan, China. Its name translates to 9 Village Valley, named after the 9 Tibetan villages that have been scattered through the area for centuries. Until 1975, the valley was almost completely unknown outside the local Tibetan and Chang communities who called it home. What makes Zhujiagu hard to believe is the color of its water. Over 100 lakes sit across the valley floor, and the mineral content of the water combined with light creates shades of blue, green, and turquoise that look digitally altered in photographs. The Norlung Waterfall, at 320 meters wide, is one of the widest highland waterfalls in China and drops over a series of natural limestone dams that took thousands of years to form. A magnitude 7.0 earthquake struck the area in 2017, causing serious damage to some of its most famous formations. The valley was declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1992 and was largely off limits to outside visitors until a road was built allowing access in the 1980s. Despite heavy tourist traffic in recent years, many of its upper valleys remain rarely visited. Giant pandas and Sichuan golden monkeys have been recorded living within its boundaries. Locals in the surrounding region had lived beside this landscape for generations without knowing the outside world had no idea it existed. Setenil de las Bodegas, Andalusia, Spain. In the province of Cádiz in southern Spain, there is a small town of roughly 3,000 people where the residents do not just live near rocks, they live under them. Setenil de las Bodegas is built directly into the overhanging cliffs of a river gorge, with houses, bars, and restaurants using the rock face as their roof. The Rio Trejo carved the gorge over thousands of years, and when people settled here, they did not fight the rock. They built against it. The town dates back to at least the 12th century, when Moorish forces used the natural rock overhangs as fortification. Christian forces trying to retake the town during the Reconquista failed 6 times before finally succeeding in 1484. A history reflected in the town's name, believed to come from the Latin phrase meaning 7 times nothing. The caves provided not just shelter, but natural climate control, staying cool in summer and warm in winter, which also made them perfect for storing wine. Hence the word bodegas in the town's name. Today, people still live, eat, and run businesses under those same rock overhangs, and some streets are covered almost entirely in shadow regardless of the time of day. Two main streets run through the gorge. One is called Sun Street, the other Shade Street, because one barely sees daylight at all. Most visitors driving through the surrounding hills have no idea the town is there until they are almost on top of it. Waitomo Glowworm Caves, New Zealand. On the North Island of New Zealand, there are caves where the ceiling moves. The Waitomo Glowworm Caves are home to thousands of Arachnocampa luminosa, a species of glowworm found only in New Zealand and Australia, that cover the cave roof in a shifting blue-green light that looks like the inside of the galaxy. These are not worms in the traditional sense. They are the larvae of a type of fungus gnat, and they are carnivorous. Each one hangs sticky threads from the cave ceiling to trap insects drawn toward its light. The caves stretch through a limestone system that took roughly 30 million years to form. Maori communities in the region had known about the caves for centuries, but they were not formally explored and documented until the 1880s. The first guided tours began in the early 1900s, making Waitomo one of New Zealand's earliest tourist attractions. Yet many New Zealanders living just hours away have never seen them. The darkness inside the caves is near total, and the only light comes from the living ceiling above. What makes Waitomo unusual, even among glowworm sites, is the sheer density of the organisms and the scale of the chamber, known as the Glowworm Grotto. Visitors pass through by boat in complete silence, looking upward at a ceiling covered in thousands of glowing points of light. The glow is produced by a chemical reaction between an enzyme and oxygen inside each larva's body. Scientists are still studying how Arachnocampa luminosa produces light with no heat, a process more efficient than almost anything humans have been able to replicate. Patagonia Marble Caves, Chile. On the border between Chile and Argentina, at the center of Lake General Carrera, the largest lake in Chile, there is a series of caverns carved entirely from solid marble. The marble caves, known locally as Capillas de Marmol, sit on a peninsula of calcium carbonate that juts into the lake. Over 6,000 years, glacial meltwater from the surrounding Andes has slowly eroded the rock into a maze of arches, tunnels, and chambers. The only way to reach them is by boat. What sets the caves apart is what happens to the light inside. The walls of polished marble reflect the color of the lake's glacial water, which shifts between turquoise, deep blue, and green, depending on the season, the time of day, and the level of the lake. In spring, when glaciers have not yet begun to melt, the water is a pale aquamarine. By summer, the rising water level turns the caves a deep, vivid blue. No two visits look the same. The caves sit roughly 2,000 kilometers from Santiago, making them one of the most remote natural formations in South America. The closest town, Puerto Rio Tranquilo, has fewer than 1,000 residents. Many Chileans living in major cities have never heard of the caves, and Argentine residents on the other side of the lake are equally unaware that they live beside one of the most remarkable geological formations on the continent. Access is frequently closed when Patagonian winds make the lake too rough for boats, sometimes for days at a time. Pamukkale Thermal Pools, Turkey. In western Turkey, there is a hillside that looks permanently covered in snow, but it has never frozen a day in its existence. Pamukkale, which means cotton castle in Turkish, is a natural site where thermal springs carrying calcium carbonate have been flowing downhill for thousands of years, leaving behind a cascade of white travertine terraces filled with warm mineral water. The water temperature in the pools sits at around 35 degrees Celsius year-round, and the mineral deposits continue to grow slowly even today. The site has been in use since at least the 2nd century BC, when the ancient Greek city of Hierapolis was built directly on top of it. The ruins of Hierapolis still stand on the plateau above the terraces, and the ancient Romans built baths here specifically to use the mineral-rich water, which was believed to have healing properties. Today, the remains of Hierapolis sit alongside the pools, and visitors can swim in an ancient bath where fallen Roman columns lie on the pool floor. UNESCO designated the combined site a World Heritage Area in 1988. Despite being one of Turkey's most significant natural sites, Many visitors flying into Istanbul or Ankara have no idea it exists until they research Turkey specifically. Locals in the surrounding Denizli region grew up beside it largely without recognizing how unusual it was. The terraces look white from a distance, but are actually a pale beige up close. The bright white seen in most photographs comes from the coating of calcium carbonate left behind when the water evaporates in the sun. Socotra Island, Yemen. There is an island in the Arabian Sea where the trees look like they belong on another planet. Socotra lies about 240 kilometers east of the Horn of Africa and has been so isolated for so long that roughly a third of its plant life exists nowhere else on Earth. The most famous of these is the dragon blood tree, a species with a flat umbrella-shaped canopy that looks like it was drawn by a child who had never seen a real tree. When the bark is cut, it bleeds a dark red resin that has been used for centuries as medicine, dye, and varnish. Socotra has been cut off from the rest of the Arabian Peninsula and Africa for millions of years, long enough that its ecosystem evolved in near-total isolation. The island is home to more than 800 plant species, hundreds of which are endemic, meaning they grew here and nowhere else. UNESCO designated Socotra a World Heritage Site in 2008 specifically for its biodiversity. The island also sits under Yemeni administration, and due to the ongoing conflict in Yemen, access has become even more restricted in recent years. The island's small population, most of whom speak a language called Socotri that has no written form, has lived alongside these extraordinary trees for centuries without knowing how remarkable they appeared to outsiders. Researchers who first cataloged Socotra's plant life in modern times compared the experience to discovering a lost world. Many of the island's species have no close relatives anywhere on the planet. Fly Geyser, Nevada, USA. In the middle of the Black Rock Desert in northern Nevada, there is a geyser that looks like something from a science fiction film, covered in red and green and constantly spraying hot water into the air. The Fly Geyser was not created by nature. In 1964, a geothermal energy company drilled a test well on the site and determined the water was not hot enough for their purposes. They left the well improperly capped. Scalding water, sitting at around 200 degrees Fahrenheit, has been erupting from it ever since. The vivid colors that cover the mound are not painted or altered. They come from thermophilic algae that thrive in hot, wet conditions and produce deep reds and greens as they grow across the calcium carbonate deposits. The mineral-rich water continues to build up the mound at a rate of several inches per year, meaning the geyser is still actively growing and changing shape. Around the main mound, the water has spread across 74 acres of terraced pools that have formed naturally over decades. Quartz has been found developing inside the geyser at a rate that typically takes 10,000 years. Scientists studying the site have called it unlike anything they have encountered. The property, known as Fly Ranch, sits on 3,800 acres of private land and was purchased in 2016 by the Burning Man Project for $6.5 million. For most of the time since 1964, it was entirely off-limits and unknown to the public. Ranchers and locals in the surrounding area drove past it for decades without realizing what was there. Small guided tours are now available by reservation only, and the mound continues to grow with every year. Zhangjiajie Mountains, Hunan, China. In the Hunan province of China, there are more than 3,000 sandstone columns rising straight out of the forest floor, some of them reaching over 1,000 meters into the air. The Zhangjiajie National Forest Park was established in 1982 as China's first national forest park, but the formations inside had been quietly sitting in the remote mountains of central China for hundreds of millions of years. The pillars formed as water and wind eroded the surrounding rock over time, leaving behind the harder sandstone cores standing alone. The area was so isolated that even within China, most people were unaware of its scale until photographs began circulating in the late 20th century. The landscape gained international attention when the production team for the 2009 film Avatar visited and used the formations as visual inspiration for the floating mountains in the film. One of the columns was subsequently renamed Avatar Hallelujah Mountain by local authorities, though the park itself predates the film by decades. The surrounding forest is home to dozens of species found only in this part of China, including the Chinese giant salamander. Visitors from the nearest major city, Changsha, face a 5 to 6 hour journey to reach the park, and many locals in surrounding provinces have never made the trip despite the formations sitting on their doorstep. The cloud cover in the area frequently rolls between the columns at mid-level, giving the appearance that the peaks are floating. On overcast days, the forest floor can be completely invisible from the top of the pillars, leaving visitors standing above what looks like an ocean of white cloud. Tsingy de Bemaraha, Madagascar. In western Madagascar, there's a landscape made entirely of razor-sharp stone. The Tsingy de Bemaraha Strict Nature Reserve covers over 1,500 square kilometers of limestone karst formations that have been carved into needle-like spires by millennia of rainfall dissolving the rock from above. Some of the spires reach 120 meters high, and the gaps between them are so narrow that large animals cannot pass through at all. The word Tsingy in the local Malagasy language means where one cannot walk barefoot, which captures the landscape accurately. The reserve was inscribed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1990 and is one of the most biologically unique places on Earth. Because the stone forest acts as an almost impenetrable barrier, the areas within and around it have developed in isolation, producing species found nowhere else on the planet. Ring-tailed lemurs, sportive lemurs, and dozens of bird species live within the formation, some of which were only scientifically described in the last few decades. The Tsingy also shelter rare plants that grow directly out of the rock in the narrow crevices where thin soil collects. The reserve is located in a remote part of Madagascar that requires significant travel even from the capital, Antananarivo. Many Malagasy people living in other parts of the island have never seen it, and local communities near the site regarded the formations as sacred and largely left them untouched for generations. Researchers who first studied the area in depth reported being unable to move more than a few meters at a time without carefully planning each step. Even today, exploration of the inner sections of the Tsingy requires ropes and harnesses. Chocolate Hills, Bohol, Philippines. On the island of Bohol in the central Philippines, there are more than 1,200 nearly identical cone-shaped hills arranged across an area of roughly 50 square kilometers. They are made of grass-covered limestone, and during the dry season, the grass dies and turns brown, turning all 1,200 hills the same shade of chocolate at the same time. The Chocolate Hills have been declared a National Geological Monument of the Philippines and have appeared on the provincial flag of Bohol since 1988. The exact origin of the hills is still a matter of scientific discussion. The most widely accepted explanation is that they are the eroded remnants of marine limestone that was lifted above sea level and then shaped by rain and groundwater over millions of years. Each hill is a nearly perfect cone, which is unusual for natural erosion, and their consistent size and shape across such a wide area makes geologists cautious about declaring any single explanation final. The hills range in height from 30 to 120 meters, with the vast majority falling within a narrow range that makes them look like they were manufactured. Local legend claims the hills were formed from the tears or droppings of a giant, depending on which version of the story is told. For many residents of Bohol, the hills are so familiar that they are simply part of the background. Visitors from elsewhere in the Philippines, particularly those from the main island of Luzon, frequently describe seeing photographs of the Chocolate Hills and assuming the image had been edited. The hills look most striking from above at the height of the dry season, when all 1,200 have turned simultaneously brown. Darvaza Gas Crater, Turkmenistan. In the middle of the Karakum Desert in Turkmenistan, a crater roughly 70 meters wide and 30 meters deep has been on fire continuously for over 50 years. The Darvaza Gas Crater, known locally as the Door to Hell, was not a natural formation. In 1971, Soviet geologists drilling for natural gas in the region accidentally collapsed the ground into an underground cavern. Faced with a large open hole releasing methane gas, they made a decision: set it on fire, assuming it would burn out within a few weeks. It has not stopped burning since. The crater sits in one of the most sparsely populated deserts in Central Asia, and Turkmenistan itself has some of the most restrictive visa policies in the world, meaning very few people have ever seen it in person. The glow from the crater is visible from miles away at night, and the heat rising from the pit is intense enough to feel from a significant distance. Local Turkmen nomads in the surrounding desert had used the surrounding region as grazing land for their camels for generations before the drilling began, and many communities near the site had little awareness of what the Soviet operations were doing until the ground collapsed. No formal decision has ever been made about how to permanently close the crater. The Turkmen government has occasionally discussed extinguishing it, but as of the last available records, it continues to burn. Scientists who have studied the site say the underground gas reserve feeding the fire is larger than originally estimated, and there is currently no clear timeline for when it might run out of fuel. Ciudad Perdida, Colombia. Deep in the Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta mountain range in northern Colombia, there is a city built into the side of a jungle-covered mountain that is roughly 650 years older than Machu Picchu. Ciudad Perdida, the Lost City, was constructed around 800 AD by the Tairona people, an indigenous civilization that built a network of terraces, plazas, and drainage systems on a steep hillside at an altitude of about 1,300 meters. At its peak, the city may have housed as many as 2,000 to 8,000 people. The city was abandoned, likely during the Spanish conquest of the 16th century, and the jungle closed over it completely. It was not rediscovered by the outside world until 1972, when a group of treasure hunters stumbled upon the stone terraces while searching the jungle. Colombian authorities became aware of the site in 1975 after looted artifacts began appearing on the black market. By 1976, an archaeological team had begun mapping the site, which required cutting through dense jungle to reach the 1,200 stone steps that lead up to the main terraces. Indigenous Kogi, Arhuaco, and Wiwa communities living in the surrounding mountains had never stopped being aware of the site. They called it Teyuna and considered it sacred. Today, reaching Ciudad Perdida requires a 4 to 6 day trek through jungle, river crossings, and steep terrain. There is no road access. The journey is guided entirely by local indigenous communities who control access to the site. Many Colombians living in major cities like Bogotá or Medellín have never attempted the trip, and a significant portion have only seen photographs. The terraces, drainage channels, and circular plaza foundations remain largely intact after more than 1,200 years in the jungle. Vadhu Island, Maldives. On Vadhu Island in the Maldives, the ocean glows blue at night. The phenomenon, known as the Sea of Stars, is caused by bioluminescent phytoplankton, microscopic marine organisms that emit light when disturbed by movement. When waves wash onto the shore, or when a fish swims through the shallows, the water around it flares with a pale blue glow. At its peak, the entire shoreline appears to be lit from below, and the reflections in the wet sand make it look as though the stars have dropped into the water. Vadhu sits in the Raa Atoll, roughly 120 miles from the Maldivian capital of Malé, and the island itself has a population of around 500 people. The bioluminescence is produced by dinoflagellates, single-celled organisms that generate light as a defense response when the water around them is disturbed. The display is most intense between June and October and is strongest during the darker phases of the moon, when there is less ambient light to wash out the glow. The conditions in Vadhu's sheltered lagoon make it one of a small number of places in the world where the phenomenon is reliably visible from the shoreline without the need for a boat. Many residents of the surrounding Maldivian islands have heard of the phenomenon but never witnessed it in person, since the bioluminescence varies in intensity from night to night and is not guaranteed on any given visit. The island has no resort infrastructure. Accommodation is in small local guest houses, and most visitors arrive not knowing exactly what to expect. Those who walk to the beach on a dark night during peak conditions describe standing in water that appears to be lit from within, with every movement of their feet triggering a fresh wave of light. Fingal's Cave, Scotland. Off the west coast of Scotland, on a small uninhabited island called Staffa, there is a sea cave made almost entirely of hexagonal basalt columns that fit together so precisely they look like they were cut by hand. Fingal's Cave stretches 23 meters high and 82 meters deep into the island, and the columns lining its walls and floor were formed approximately 60 million years ago, when lava cooled slowly and contracted into six-sided shapes. The floor of the cave is level with the sea, and the sound of waves echoing inside the chamber creates a constant low resonance that 19th century visitors described as music. The cave sits on Staffa, an island with no permanent residents, roughly 10 kilometers from the nearest inhabited island of Mull. It was largely unknown outside the local Hebridean communities until the naturalist Joseph Banks documented it in 1772, after which it became one of the most celebrated geological curiosities in Europe. The composer Felix Mendelssohn visited in 1829 and later wrote a concert overture inspired by the sounds he heard inside, a piece still performed today and known as the Hebrides. Jules Verne referenced the cave in one of his novels. Despite this, many people living on the Scottish mainland an hour away by ferry have never seen it. Access to Staffa is entirely weather-dependent, and the island has no dock. Visitors must step from a small boat directly onto the basalt rocks. In rough weather, landings are impossible. The columns that form the cave are the same geological formation as the Giant's Causeway in Northern Ireland, roughly 100 kilometers away, both produced by the same ancient volcanic episode. Richat Structure, Mauritania. In the Sahara Desert in Mauritania, there's a formation so large it can only be fully seen from space. The Richat structure, known as the Eye of the Sahara, is a series of concentric rings of rock roughly 50 kilometers in diameter that appear as a perfect bullseye when viewed from orbit. It was first noticed by astronauts on early NASA missions, who used it as a landmark during re-entry because it was one of the few clearly identifiable features on the otherwise featureless Saharan plain. On the ground, the rings are so gradual and so large that anyone standing within the formation has no way of perceiving its shape. For decades, scientists believed the structure was the result of a meteorite impact, but current geological research suggests it formed from a dome of rock that was pushed upward and then eroded over hundreds of millions of years, leaving the harder rings of rock exposed as the surrounding material wore away. The erosion has also exposed rock layers, spanning a significant portion of Earth's geological history, making the Richat structure one of the most studied geological sites in North Africa. The innermost ring contains some of the oldest exposed rock in the region. The nearest towns are small desert communities with limited outside contact, and many residents of Mauritania's coastal cities are unaware of the structure's existence or significance. Tourists who have attempted to drive to the site describe a multi-day journey on unpaved desert roads with no services. From the ground, the Richat structure looks like nothing more than a series of low ridges, so unremarkable that travelers crossing the Sahara have passed directly through it without realizing anything was unusual. It took photographs from orbit to reveal what was there. Derinkuyu Underground City, Turkey. In the Cappadocia region of central Turkey, there is a city under the ground. Derinkuyu extends at least 18 levels below the surface, reaches a depth of approximately 85 meters, and at its maximum capacity is estimated to have sheltered up to 20,000 people, along with their livestock, food stores, and water supplies. The tunnels include ventilation shafts, wells, storage rooms, chapels, stables, wine presses, and large circular stone doors that could be rolled across passages from the inside to seal sections of the city against intruders. The city was likely first carved out during the 8th and 7th centuries BC, with significant expansion occurring during the Byzantine period, when Christian communities used it to hide from Arab raids. The ventilation system is so well designed that fresh air still reaches the lowest levels today. Derinkuyu is connected by a tunnel to another underground city called Kaimakli, roughly 9 kilometers away, suggesting that the underground network in this region was far more extensive than any single site reveals. The full extent of the tunnel system has still not been completely mapped. The city remained hidden beneath the surface until 1963, when a local resident in the town of Derinkuyu broke through a wall during renovations and discovered a room behind it. Further investigation revealed the scale of what lay beneath the entire neighborhood. The people living directly above it had been farming and building on the surface for generations with no knowledge of what was underneath. Today, only about half of the underground city is open to the public, and what remains unexplored is still considered significant by archaeologists. Erwangdong, Chongqing, China. In the Wulong Karst region of Chongqing Municipality in China, there's a cave so large it produces its own weather. Erwangdong, which translates as Second Royal Cave, has over 42 kilometers of known passages and reaches a maximum depth of 441 meters. Its largest chamber, known as Cloud Ladder Hall, is so vast that clouds form inside it. The ceiling sits more than 250 meters above the cave floor, and the humidity rising into the colder upper air condenses into actual cloud and fog that obscures the roof entirely. The cave was largely unknown to the outside world until a team of 15 expert cavers and photographers entered it during a month-long expedition in 2013, producing the first photographs of its interior. What they found exceeded what most of them had encountered in decades of cave exploration. The floor of Cloud Ladder Hall is covered in lush vegetation, trees, ferns, and brush growing in the dark, fed by light filtering down from sinkholes above. Blind fish with no eyes have been documented in the cave's underground pools, having evolved in complete darkness over thousands of years. Local communities near the cave entrance had long used the fog rising from the entrance sinkhole as a weather prediction tool. If fog came out of the cave, rain was expected. The cave sits within the UNESCO World Heritage-listed South China Karst and is part of the Wulong Karst National Geology Park. Despite being connected to a World Heritage Site, Erwangdong itself remained essentially unexplored until the 2013 expedition. Residents of the rural village of Ranjiagu, located near the entrance, knew the cave existed but had no idea of its true scale. The expedition team reported that the size of the chambers they encountered made them feel, in their own words, as though they had found somewhere no human had ever stood. Salar de Uyuni, Bolivia. In the southwest of Bolivia, at an altitude of 3,656 meters above sea level, there is a salt flat that covers 10,582 square kilometers, making it the largest in the world by a significant margin. The Salar de Uyuni was formed when a series of prehistoric lakes evaporated over thousands of years, leaving behind a crust of salt between 2 and 10 meters thick, sitting on top of a vast pool of brine. Beneath the surface, that brine contains the largest known reserve of lithium on Earth, estimated at over half of the world's total supply. What makes the salar visually extraordinary is what happens after rain. A thin layer of water across the salt flat creates a reflection so perfect that the surface becomes a mirror of the sky. The boundary between land and sky disappears entirely, and it becomes impossible to tell where the ground ends and the clouds begin. It is one of the largest natural mirrors on Earth, and photographs taken there, where people appear to be standing inside the clouds, are not manipulated. The effect is real and occurs naturally every wet season. The salar sits in one of the most remote and thinly populated parts of South America. The nearest city of any size is Uyuni, a small railway town on the edge of the flat. Many Bolivians living in La Paz or Santa Cruz have never visited, despite the salar being one of the country's most significant natural resources. The indigenous Aymara communities who have lived on the altiplano surrounding the salt flat for centuries conducted traditional ceremonies on its surface long before outsiders became aware of what made it remarkable from the air. Son Doong Cave, Vietnam. In the Phong Nha Ke Bang National Park in central Vietnam, there is a cave so large that it has its own jungle, its own river, and its own clouds. Son Doong, which means Mountain River Cave in Vietnamese, is the largest known cave in the world by volume, stretching approximately 5 kilometers in length, with chambers reaching 200 meters high and 150 meters wide. Inside, a river runs along the cave floor, and 2 massive sinkholes in the ceiling have allowed enough light to enter that a functioning jungle has grown on the cave floor, with trees reaching 30 meters tall. The cave was first encountered in 1991 by a local farmer named Ho Khan, who stumbled across the entrance while sheltering from rain in the jungle. The entrance was so large and the wind and sound coming from inside were so intense that he left and could not find it again for nearly 20 years. A British cave exploration team finally entered and mapped it in 2009. What they found shattered existing records for cave size. The largest chamber alone could fit an entire New York City block of 40-story buildings inside it. The cave contains stalactites over 70 meters tall, among the largest ever recorded. Permits to enter Son Doong are strictly limited to a small number of visitors per year, and the trek to reach it through dense jungle takes multiple days. Most Vietnamese people living in cities have never seen it, and the communities in the surrounding jungle region of Quang Binh province had long known the cave entrance existed but had no idea what lay inside. The cave is still being explored. Sections at both ends have not yet been fully mapped, and researchers believe the known passages may not represent the full extent of the system. Whatever is still down there has never been seen. These 20 places exist right now, under cities, inside mountains, at the bottom of deserts, and beneath the ocean floor. Some are accessible to anyone willing to make the journey. Others may never be fully explored. The most extraordinary thing about every place on this list is that for most of history, the people living closest to them had no idea what they were standing next to. If you enjoyed this video and want to learn more beyond belief facts, click on the video appearing on your screen now, and remember to hit the subscribe button.